of the Gospel of Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born, King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, so that I also may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. When the prophet who has become known as Third Isaiah first speaks these majestic words, his listeners undoubtedly scoff. To the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who return from exile in Babylon, the proclamation that their light has come must sound ludicrous. For them it is a time of darkness and depression, not of light and joy. Decades ago, when the Persian Emperor Cyrus defeated their hated overlords, the Babylonians, and topped it off by issuing an edict giving whomever wished the right not only to return to their homeland, but also to rebuild the temple at Jerusalem, the exiles were overjoyed and optimism abounded. The prophet we know as Second Isaiah got so caught up in the frenzy of hope and excitement that he proclaimed Cyrus to be the Messiah and envisioned a triumphant return to the land of Israel, an enormous homecoming parade in which the desert would bloom and the very trees of the field would applaud. The reality of the situation, however, has turned out to be quite different. Now, 2 or 3 generations later, it's very discouraging to see much of the land still in ruins, to compare the pathetic shack they have erected in Jerusalem with the glory of Solomon's temple, and to know that many of those who remained in the land for the 50-odd years of the exile were less than thrilled to have them back. The grand parade turned out to be a mere trickle, and the elation of their parents and grandparents seems, in retrospect, pretty naive. So do the prophecies of 2nd Isaiah. Cyrus was no Messiah. He was a politician and tyrant like all the rest. He had his own reasons for allowing the people to return to build the temple, reasons that had nothing to do with devotion to Israel's God. What was once the sovereign kingdom of Judah is now a vassal state of the Medes and Persians, with the temple as an administrative center whose primary purpose in the empire's eyes is to coordinate the collection of tribute to fill the coffers of Cyrus and his successors. The peace, prosperity, and autonomy 2nd Isaiah envisioned remains elusive. For 3rd Isaiah, though, none of this constitutes a good reason for despair or cynicism. In the spirit of all true prophets, his imagination is not limited by his present circumstances. He knows that in absence of loyalty to the God of the covenant, no abundance is legitimate, and as long as God is still with the people, no deprivation is permanent. Unlike many of his contemporaries, when he stares in the darkness, he can make out a faint halo of approaching light. For darkness shall cover the earth, he says, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. The prophet calls his people to view their circumstances with the eyes of faith. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They all come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried in their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice. A new day is coming, he says, a day of redemption and vindication, a day when God's promise that through Abraham's offspring all the people of the world will be blessed will be realized. A day when God will renew God's promise to David that a descendant of his will sit on the throne of an everlasting kingdom. In spite of how things look to the people, with their nation in shambles and themselves under the thumb of the oppressor of the weak, God sees the situation differently. God sees them as a kingdom of priests and God's chosen vehicle to bring the reign of God to fruition and to bless the whole world. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. The abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. Which incidentally doesn't sound that appealing to me, but anyway. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, those from Sheba, shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. The prophet's words resonate with hope and faith, but also with longing. He expresses the perennial yearning of forgotten people everywhere, that one day they will be remembered and recognized, that the one who has always been picked last will turn out to be the hero of the game, that those who have been passed over time and time again will finally be celebrated publicly. It is the yearning of underdogs and the victims of bullies in every time and place that one day the tables will be turned. The last will be first, and the first last. The losers will be victorious, and those who have always been used to winning will have to hand them the trophy. It is a dream of vindication and a longing for justice. More than that, though, it is an acknowledgement of responsibility. To be a kingdom of priests is not just a privilege meant to glorify the people of Israel. Their priesthood is for the life of the world. The nations will come to their light because it's the light of God shining out and dispelling the darkness. The prophet's words serve as a reminder that the covenant with Abraham, the Torah given through Moses, and God's promises to David carry with them responsibility not just for the nation, but for the world. God's concern has never been with a single chosen people, whether Israel or the church or any other group. The chosen people are chosen for the purpose of shining God's light, and their faithfulness to God will always lead to others being drawn to the light. So 3rd Isaiah's words also reflect a longing to fulfill the commission God gave the people through their ancestors, a longing to be part of God's work in the world. These same longings are still operative 500 years later. If anything, they are even sharper. Apart from a 100-year period of relative independence under the Hasmonean kings, the Jewish people have continued to be subject to one foreign empire after another. Going back to the time of the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel in the late 8th century, their overlords have included in rapid succession the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Syrians. Even their brief time of liberty under the Hasmoneans had been no picnic for the common people. And And that dynasty was succeeded by the biggest and baddest wolf of them all, Rome. A lot of different names, cultures, and languages, but they all wear the one face of empire. Nations have indeed come to Zion, but not in response to the light of God or to bring camels loaded with tribute. On the contrary, they have come to plunder. The writer of the Gospel of Matthew understands the absolute horror of what the coming of the nations could mean. In 70 CE, the Jewish War, the ill-advised uprising that began in 66, gets crushed by the Roman legions under Titus. And if anyone knows about crushing, it's the Romans. After a protracted siege, they break through the walls of Jerusalem, burn the city and the temple, and slaughter everyone in sight. The Jewish historian Josephus claims that more than 1 million people are killed. Josephus is not the most reliable of narrators and tends to exaggerate, but whatever the numbers, the carnage is incredible. Matthew, or at least some members of his community, were eyewitnesses of these atrocities. And as he writes his gospel some 15 years after the razing of Jerusalem, the problems of living under occupation by an imperial power are real and personal to him. As one of the first to undertake a narrative of Jesus' birth and early years, he applies what he knows firsthand, as well as what he knows from history, to his story of Jesus' origins. He knows, for instance, that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, the infamous despot whose political skill won him a throne as one of Rome's client kings and whose ambition and brutality kept him on that throne for nearly 40 years. Matthew knows Herod's record of repression and violence and of the paranoia that led him to remove from the picture anyone his diseased mind told him was a threat, such as one of his wives and 3 of his sons, whom he executed because of his suspicions. Matthew knows that Herod ruled a larger territory than even David or Solomon, and that Caesar gave him the title King of the Jews. But Matthew is also steeped in the scriptures of his people, so he knows that Herod's reign does not even come close to God's vision for Israel and the world. With many of his fellow Jews, Matthew believes that God will one day send a deliverer and liberator, a Messiah, to make God's reign a reality on earth. Like a few of his fellow Jews and a growing number of Gentiles, he believes that this Messiah has already come in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Matthew's church comprises both Jews and Gentiles who share this conviction about Jesus despite their differences. Those differences are real, however, and sometimes create conflict, so Matthew seeks ways to bring the two groups together. With the context of his mixed congregation in the foreground of his mind and in the background, both Isaiah 60 and Psalm 72, which envision the kings of Tarshish, Sheba, and Seba bringing gifts and tribute to Israel's king, Matthew proceeds to tell the story of Jesus' birth that in ways that emphasize his fulfillment of the hopes of Jew and Gentile alike. For Matthew, Jesus is the light and the glory of the Lord that has risen upon the people. Jesus is the one in whose days righteousness will flourish and peace will abound. Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, the true King of the Jews. So Matthew tells the story of Magi from the east, who come to Jerusalem sometime after Jesus' birth to inquire into the whereabouts of the newborn King of the Jews. They are Gentiles, and they represent the nations who come to the light, in the words of 3rd Isaiah. But the star they identify through their astrological arts as portending the birth of a king can't get them all the way to Jesus. They also need the assistance of the Hebrew Scriptures. Herod, understandably alarmed at the Magi's question, asks when the Messiah is to be born, and the scribes tell him that a descendant of David has to be born in David's hometown. Equipped with this more complete intelligence, the Magi proceed to Bethlehem. When they find the house where Jesus is, Matthew says they are overwhelmed with joy, and they open their treasure chests and offer gifts fit for a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This episode echoes Isaiah 60, They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. Today is Epiphany Sunday. Epiphany is January 6th, but this is the Sunday we celebrate Epiphany. And Epiphany means revelation or realization. And in the story of the Magi's visit, we see the revelation of God's plan to the Gentiles and the foreshadowing of the work of Paul and others to include the Gentiles within the scope of the gospel. But for Matthew, the path still leads through the covenant people. The star points the Magi in the general direction, but apart from the scriptural revelation, they can't find Jesus. As in Matthew's community, in the birth narrative, we see the coming together of Gentiles and Jews in the quest for Christ. Also, just as in Matthew's time, in the birth narrative, we see a clash of kingdoms. Herod the Great is the king of the Jews, and he has no intention of entertaining a rival. He sends the Magi on their way to Bethlehem, instructing them to find the child and then report back so that he too can pay homage. But we know he intends no such thing. One wonders how wise these wise men really are if they have to be warned in a dream not to return to Herod. Herod represents empire. And just as the Romans will later find the adult Jesus a threat to their power, Herod recognizes the danger in this tiny king and tries to destroy him. But he doesn't succeed. God thwarts him by warning the Magi not to go back to Jerusalem, and then by sending Joseph, Mary, and Jesus to Egypt to escape Herod's wrath. In the same way, 30 years later, when Pontius Pilate tries to snuff out the threat to the empire that Jesus and his followers represent, he doesn't succeed either. Sure, he is able to use the power at his command to put Jesus to death, but God thwarts him by raising Jesus and exalting him to the highest place, so that, in Paul's words, at the name of Jesus every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The power of hate and violence and fear is no match for the power of love and grace, although it so often fools us into thinking it is stronger. The reign of empire and tyranny are no match for the reign of God as evidenced in the life, death, resurrection, and exaltation of Jesus. The darkness of the world is no match for the light of God in the face of Jesus, a light that still draws the nations and peoples of the world. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Amen.